All right, Colts Nation, we are out here getting dangerously close to free agency. And now that we are this close, I have come up with my final list of players that we need to re-sign and the ones that we need to let go. Well, actually, hold on. Let me correct myself. Not the ones we need to do anything with, okay? The ones that I would re-sign and the ones that I would let go if I was the GM, which I am not. Now, I did release one of these episodes kind of right off the season, and it was just kind of like a stream of consciousness type of thing. I made sure to say in that video that it was fluid because I knew I'd be coming back to the topic. And sure enough, some of my opinions have changed. So if you saw that one, don't worry. There is some different content here for you, but just to make sure we're on the same page so we know. Monday, March 11th, the start of Ramadan, by the way, for all my Muslim brothers. Now, I'm not Muslim, of course, but we are inclusive over here. The only people I'm prejudiced against are Jaguars fans, right? Fuck those guys. That's neither here nor there. What a digression that was just to get the episode started, right? Point being, Monday, March 11th, teams can start negotiating with players whose contracts are set to expire. That's technically like the start of the new league year. It's either the 11th or the 13th. Point being is the start of free agency is technically the start of the 2024-2025 season. I just want to make sure that we understand that, right? That means that if the Colts want to ensure that some of the guys they're looking to re-sign don't get to see other offers, they really need to get a deal done before the end of the weekend. Now, the reality of the situation is that these guys are going to want to go test free agency, particularly guys who anticipate that there's going to be a market for their services, right? Free agency for a team comes every single offseason, year after year after year. They got to go through the same process over and over again. The average NFL lifespan for a player, I'm not talking about their actual life, I'm talking about their playing career, is 3 years. And if you play like 10 years, that only allows you to hit free agency twice, 3 times at most, right? It just doesn't happen too often for these guys, particularly when perhaps they're about to get the biggest bag of their career. It just does not happen too often that they get to hit free agency. If I was a player, I would at least want to see what I'm worth as well. That's only fair, right? Now, while we know Michael Pittman Jr. has been tagged, presumably the talks of re-signing him are going to continue into training camp, into the season, et cetera, et cetera. I think he'll be just fine playing for $21.8 million for as long as it takes, but maybe not. We saw what happened with Jonathan Taylor last year. Not that it was on a franchise tag, but you get my point. You never know. Regardless, Pittman aside, he left us, or rather the franchise tag left us with $49 million in cap. Now, as I go through this episode, I'm going to spare you of me trying to give a valuation of what type of contract that these guys are going to get and what they're going to demand, because quite frankly, I can assure you, I have no fucking clue what I'm talking about when it comes to that type of thing. I can't assure you any form of accuracy. I could try my best, and maybe every now and then I would be right. But overall, I don't really know, right? But it does go without saying, you got to pay guys market value, whether you like it or not. Whatever the market dictates is what they should get, right? If you go to the grocery store for a carton of eggs, you don't take the eggs off the counter, then go to the clerk or whatever, the person ringing it up, and get mad at them for the price of the eggs and start trying to play let's make a deal, right? The eggs cost what they cost. You either want the eggs or you don't want the eggs. It's very simple. If you don't want to pay for the price of eggs, well, then you better figure out a different breakfast, right? But if you want eggs, you pay for the eggs. And when you don't pay for those eggs because you thought they were too expensive, don't come crying when you're short on protein for the day. Do you get what I'm saying here? You got to pay what they're worth, whether you like it or not. Whether you consider it overpaid, it doesn't really matter. The market dictates what is paid and what is overpaid. If you've ever been on the computer, online shopping, and you're like, wow, that item's way too expensive. No, it's not. That is a result of supply and demand. The market dictates the value, and that's just the name of the game. That's how the business works, whether we like it or not. So we have to live in that reality, okay? So let's get into the episode. It should not be too long. We are going to end up starting with some of the intermediate rotational guys, some of those guys that some of you might not view as crucial before getting into those big decisions on the back end of the show. But before you do, you know what it is. I got to introduce myself. My name is Justin. This right here is the Ride on the Bench Colts podcast. As always, I ask anyone enjoying the episode on YouTube, go ahead, shoot it a like. It's going to help me get out to as many Colts fans as humanly possible. Audio listeners, shoot it a 5-star review. Let the people know how much you like the show. If you don't like it, don't shoot a 1-star. That's the rude thing to do. We finally hit 2,100 subscribers. Next goal, 22. We're biting this off in chunks of 100. We want to be at 3,000 by next season. And apparently next season starts in a week, as I said before. But you get my point, the playing season. As we go into Colts games next year, I would love to be at 3,000. So if you come back, you enjoy the show, and you've yet to subscribe, today might be the day. As always, what I say here is this. Well, I don't always say this. I fucked up the intro. Whatever. I'll stick with it. My point, I said it once, I'll say it again. If you're into Indiana sports, maybe there's another place for you, right? Like if you like the Hoosiers and Purdue and the Pacers or whatever, I don't know, whatever Indiana has to offer, right? In terms of sports, other places to be. But if you're talking about the Colts, baby, this is the spot right here. It's all Colts, only Colts. There will never be over here some sort of rebrand to me talking about all Indiana sports. I'm a Long Island, New York native, and I just love this team, and I'm a football guy through and through. You know, when you hear me, it's football and football only. But without further ado, that's a bit too long-winded, right, for the intro. You guys want me to get to the meat of the show? Well, here it is. So let's start with those rotational guys, and we're going to start with the dudes that we want to re-sign, or that I want to re-sign, okay? Start with Henry Black, right? Safety is a weakness that we have. We all know this. Let's just keep the depth, okay? I'm not saying that Henry Black is going to be the difference between our safety room being good and bad, but we can always cut him as we head into the season, right? I would like to have him here through the offseason just as an additional guy, an additional body, an additional piece of competition going into training camp. Number 2, Tyquan Lewis. We waited so long for Tyquan Lewis to stay healthy and gave him so many chances to do so, right? Because we liked his talent, and rightfully so. As a rotational piece, I love what Tyquan Lewis brings to the table. Well, he finally was healthy this year, and sure enough, he was productive. So, I mean, why get rid of him now, right? We don't know if a guy like a Kwity Paye, we're still kind of iffy as to whether or not he's truly a part of our future. For all we know, he ends up being a trade candidate come like the midpoint of next season. So let's keep a guy like Tyquan Lewis around, who is going to be on a relatively cheap deal, and just allow us to have the flexibility and feel comfortable in the case that something like trading a Kwity Paye happens or we get an injury. I think Tyquan Lewis is a productive guy. Like to have him around. Danny Pinter, let's re-sign him. Liked him as a depth piece before he broke his foot, or rather his ankle. Can never have too many linemen in this league, particularly ones that are budget friendly. I want to keep him around. I want to see how he comes back from that injury, but we should continue to be proactive about adding depth to this position, whether it be guard, tackle, center, whatever it is, the line. A lot of it becomes interchangeable at some point, depending on the guys you have there. Not to say that's a hard and fast rule, but plenty of guys can play both guard and tackle. Let's get those guys in free agency, and let's look for them in the draft as well. And again, just keep the depth here. We don't want to take for granted that we have a good line. We're used to having a solid line, except for like 1 or 2 seasons recently. Let's not get passive there. Bring Pinter back. Continue to bolster the depth at this position. Rigoberto Sanchez has been a very, very good punter for us. There is no reason to fix what is not broken, although I suppose some would argue that you could draft one and save some money. I'd prefer to keep him around. Us Colts fans are so used to having great punters, right? We're so used to have, is not a Josh Downs jersey, so you know who it is. Last time we used the franchise tag before Pittman. So used to having great punters over here that we've almost forgotten that it's possible to have a shitty punter, right? So Rigoberto Sanchez is a good punter. It's not a problem we have. It's not a problem we're accustomed to having. Let's not create one for no reason, okay? Now for the guys we're not going to re-sign. If you guys can do process of elimination, great, but let's go through them. Isaiah McKenzie. This position needs to improve at wide receiver. Very simple. He was a solid, versatile piece for us. He's good in the return game, fine as a backup slot receiver. There is nothing that he can do that Josh Downs can't do and can't do better, right? I would rather us draft someone that we view as a slot option in the mid to late rounds to be a backup slot receiver for us, perhaps bring in a body for training camp in free agency, and go from there. I don't think we'll lose any sleep if Isaiah McKenzie's not on the team. Zach Moss, don't re-sign. Full transparency, I would like Zach Moss around. We cannot say enough about how important Zach Moss was to the Indianapolis Colts this season. They wouldn't have even sniffed the playoffs if Zach Moss hadn't done what he did early in the season, if you ask me. I feel like he ends up getting a crack at a starting job elsewhere. It's not so much let him go because we don't need him or couldn't use him, because we absolutely could use him. And if we lose Zach Moss, we need to make sure that we have someone ready to come in and fill in that role. Maybe Trey Sermon is a part of that mix. I really liked what he brought to the table for us since we brought him in this season. But we cannot afford to pay Zach Moss starting running back money, in my opinion, particularly after just paying Jonathan Taylor. So I love Zach Moss, would like Zach Moss here in a perfect world. It just doesn't seem very likely. Gardner Minshew, I could make this long or I could make this short. Everything I just said about Zach Moss very much applies to Gardner Minshew Jr. No matter, is it Junior or the third or the second, right? I called him Junior. I don't know why I said Junior. Gardner Minshew, right? Everything I said about Zach Moss applies. You may like him. You may not like him. You may have your gripes with him. Whatever. We would have been way worse if we had been using someone else, if you ask me, at the backup quarterback position. We cannot afford to get passive at this position. Me saying that Gardner Minshew is not a re-sign does not mean I don't think we should be continuously being aggressive at the backup quarterback position. I think you got to draft someone in the mid-rounds. I think you got to bring in a free agent, and then you got to let Sam Ehlinger compete with them. Have 4 guys, 5 guys going into training camp. May the best 2 backups win out of that competition, right? And then we go in with hopefully a decent crew of quarterbacks behind Anthony Richardson. Other guys I wouldn't re-sign include Taven Bryan at defensive tackle. I don't think he's that bad. Don't think he's that good. Wouldn't lose any sleep. And Jannard Avery at defensive end. I think we have a lot here at this position. Drafted guys like Titus Leo last year. Drafted guys like Ayadabare last year. Of course, if I were to bring back Tyquan Lewis, there's really very little reason to bring back Jannard Avery as well. We can always draft a depth piece somewhere along the line in this year's draft. So those are the rotational guys. And if you're still here and if you're still listening, now we're on to the big ones. Now we're on to like the big opinions, right? These are the ones that maybe are going to be a little bit more debatable for some of you guys. And I want to start with Grover Stewart because this was my biggest change of heart. I was never bullish. My initial episode, I said, man, I think I would let Grover go. And while I wasn't particularly bullish on it, I have changed that opinion full throttle to the point where I'm like, we got to get it done with Grover Stewart, right? The run defense was night and day without Grover Stewart. In fact, particularly the defense as a whole was night and day without Grover Stewart, right? The D-line is a position right now that nobody is considering a need of this football team. And quite frankly, for good reason, right? We have enough other needs in this offseason that are not the defensive line. But what Grover brings to the table is not just unique to the Colts. It's not just that he's the only guy on the Colts that does what he does, but really the league as a whole. Grover Stewart is one of the premier run stoppers in all of the NFL. He's just one of the best in the league when it comes to that specific part of the game. He's a true specialist and he makes a huge difference on our defense. We know how much Chris Ballard likes him. Grover Stewart, I think for me, now that Pittman's out of the way, is top priority. You have to get something done with Grover Stewart, period. Have to. Can't afford not to. Don't care if we're paying both DeForest Buckner and Grover Stewart. We could figure that out when the time comes. Right now, if we're talking about trying to be a competitive football team next year, Grover Stewart is the guy that we need to have around right here. Now, Kenny Moore. A lot of people talk about Kenny Moore with a level of disrespect, right? They talk about him like, oh, he's just a slot corner, like it's a bad thing to be a specialist at something in this league, right? We talk about Grover being a fantastic run stopper. Well, Kenny is one of the premier slot corners in the league, and that is not just a bias of me being a Colts fan. In fact, one of you was kind enough to inform me in one of my recent videos that Kenny Moore played slot corner. Thank you for that. Of course, I had never watched the Colts game in my entire life, so I wouldn't have known that. Come on. You know who you are, but I'm better than that now, okay? You look at some of the great receivers in this league, and what a lot of these offensive guys, these offensive dudes, I'm talking about the coordinators, the head coaches, whoever's calling the play, what they try to do often is get these guys lined up inside to find a matchup, to find a mismatch. When you have a guy like Kenny Moore on the roster, it is not as simple as just bringing a guy into the slot and then being like, now we have a good matchup because their best corner's on the outside. And what he brings as a run stopper, or at least not a run stopper like Grover Stewart, of course, but as a corner that can play the run, is very, very underappreciated. Now, of course, in terms of my point of bringing guys inside to get a mismatch in the slot, no one really has to do that against the Colts because they're doing just fine on the outside, right? I understand that much. We're going to try to improve there as well. But for me, you look at Kenny Moore, tough spot, tough decision between him and Julian Blackmon. In my opinion, you have to choose between him and Julian Blackmon just because of the cost. Now, we have a deep draft at corner, and Kenny Moore, in my opinion, whether or not he's with the Indianapolis Colts going into that draft, is going to decide whether or not we draft one in the first round. We may draft one in the first round anyway, but if we don't have any Kenny Moore on the squad, you could take it to the bank that we draft a corner in the first round, barring some sort of miracle of one of these top flight offensive guys slipping down to that 15 slot unless we trade up. But Kenny Moore is who I would pick between him and Julian Blackmon, because Julian Blackmon is younger, right? And has shown signs of being a very, very good safety in this league. Dare I say even a great safety he has shown the potential to be. He just cannot stay on the field. And you know the old cliche, the old adage, the best availability. Oh, I fucked it up. Shit. Justin. All right. The best ability is availability. And you look at the group of safeties in free agency right now, which we will get into, in the coming days because it's another episode I have lined up. But it's turning out to really be shaping up into an excellent, excellent free agent class of safeties. The Colts are really going to have some options there. And even with the turnovers that Julian Blackmon forced, I just think we're going to end up with more options to replace Julian Blackmon's role on the team than we will have to replace Kenny Moore's specific roles on the team, right? We allowed the second most explosive plays in all of the NFL. Now, those were not all deep shots. Obviously, we saw our fair share of short passes outside the hashes and by the sidelines that turned into huge gains, right? We understand that, but we all know there were plenty of deep shots, too, that were executed on this Colts team. And I'm not saying it was all on Julian Blackmon, but he was very much a part of that room and was really the leader of that room. So there's a level of accountability, perhaps almost even irrationally so at times, that needs to be held against guys of that magnitude, in that role, in that position, right? So with that being said, this would worry me, by the way. Like, letting Julian Blackmon go is not like an easy decision for me to make, but at some point, someone has to walk that is going to demand a contract, and you can't keep everyone. Julian Blackmon, I would take my chances reluctantly, and, that's that. That being said, if you tell me that between Kenny Moore and Julian Blackmon, you're going to let Kenny walk and keep Julian Blackmon, I'm not going to hate you for that because that makes sense to me as well. This is just my personal opinion. That may be right, may be wrong. This is one of those things I'm really not incredibly bullish on, but it is ultimately the decision I would make. More corners than safeties in the draft, so that would obviously lend itself to the idea that you would let Kenny go instead, but I don't know. I'm curious to hear what you think on that one because I think that's probably the toughest decision the Colts have as we go into free agency and re-sign. One thing is for certain, there's no shot, in my opinion, you can afford to lose both of those guys. And if it does go down that way, we can't rewrite history and pretend that was the plan. There was no chance the Colts have the intentions of letting both of these guys walk. If they're both on a different team, that would have been something backfiring on the Indianapolis Colts. So that's something for us to keep in mind. But with that, that's the episode. Until next time, my name is Justin. This right here was the Riding the Bench Colts podcast. And as always, go Colts.